All right, so just as a recap, last class we talked about some of the basics of communication, including interpersonal communication, right? So last Friday was a look at interpersonal communication. We talked a lot about uncertainty reduction theory and the way that we use communication through reciprocal self-disclosure, right? I share a little bit about myself, I let my guard down, you do the same, and that process allows us to get to know each other better. We also talked about some of the ways that we use communication with others, such as the kind of sender-receiver model, right? We send a message, we basically upload it, either through using media or through using our voice, facial expressions, gestures, and so on, and then it gets downloaded by the other person. We talked a little bit about ethics too. So ethical listening, right, is this idea of empathy and perspective taking. Like Atticus Finch, you put yourself in somebody else's shoes and walk around in them for a while. So for today's class, as a writing workshop, what I want to do is talk about what makes good writing, particularly good writing at the college level, some cases of both good and bad writing, and then to help apply some of these things to some of the major assignments in the course. Now, the first major writing assignment in this class isn't due until mid-November, so it's not for a while, but I figured that it's helpful as you're starting to think about these major assignments and can also be useful for other classes. As far as writing assignments go, the first major writing assignment in this class is the interpersonal analysis essay. In this assignment, I'm asking you to examine a mediated portrayal of two characters. So, maybe you've got Ross and Rachel in Friends, or Pam and Jim in The Office, or whatever characters you so choose. And you're looking at the ways that these two characters engage in interpersonal communication with one another, applying some of the concepts that we have talked about in the class in the first few weeks. So what I'd like you to do is, using the prompt that you just completed for today, I'd like you to find a small group of people. You can choose anywhere as small as 3 to as large as like 6. And what I'd like you to do in these groups is share how you answered the prompt. So in your own words, what you feel like makes a good college essay. And as you're having each person in your group share, I'd like you to notice some of the things that are emerging as common themes or ideas that all members of the group seem to think. And then I'll ask each group to have a representative that will share some of the major overarching themes or ideas that your group members came up with. So go ahead, say hello, maybe to somebody or two that you haven't met before. Share what you wrote for this prompt, and then we'll be talking about this together in just a few minutes. If there's anybody you don't know, you can, but if you're closer to a group of people you've met before, that's okay too.
Vocab, definitions, strong different ideas, quotes, sources, summarizing your ideas, main point, conclusion, title accurately, recommend putting the books into your own words to explain it, or strategies that influence the reader to get to second point of view, writing,
I think it's, by the way, a really good suggestion to have a peer or somebody work on a rough draft. Getting another pair of eyes is so helpful. There's so many typos or things that you might miss on your own draft. Yeah, because red is red pen. That's okay. When it comes to sources, I use some of the ways that you use MLA can use any one of the three for this class. Whichever one. Yeah, it's definitely a process to get There are a couple things that stood out to you all.
Having like reliable sources.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a
research papers and stuff.
sure. That's a good point, JP. We'll talk in a sec about the 3 hecks of sources. Who the heck wrote it? When the heck was it published? Who the heck paid for it? Right. And those are ways to think about using sources effectively. Take another minute or two to finish up, and then we'll talk about all of this together.
Making sure the sources are where I know some people like 10 years ago, some teachers just like white.
Yeah.
Big vocabulary like things like being brown.
Yeah.
Making it big interesting in the reading.
Yeah.
And thesis, obviously, that too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good overview of that, right? Especially keeping it engaging. I think a lot of folks think because they're writing for college level, they have to be boring. And using the grade, avoiding passive voice, all of those things can help.
Me too. I feel like we're on the same page. We're like the first day when you had like the arrows and like the, I was like, that's really good.
All right, so I've been hearing some really good conversation from you all about some tips for good writing. So let's go ahead and talk together. So have somebody in your group that's willing to share some of the major themes or ideas that emerged for you all. So why don't we go ahead and start up here with this partnership in the front.
And so we set stuff like professor standards, make sure you know what the professor likes and what they want you to write in the style and stuff.
Sure.
Have you gotta have good structure, of course. You don't want a bunch of random paragraphs in there. You want to have introduction, thesis, all that stuff. Have it all in there. Just shred up basic spelling, grammar. You gotta make sure that's all correct. Especially at the college level, it's a lot more expected to be there. There's not people aren't as lenient anymore. Reliable sources. If you're doing a research paper, make sure they come from reliable places and not just random blog post or anything like that.
Right. JP and Alexis, right? Awesome. Yeah, you all have a really good starting point. When it comes to sources, one thing that James Gunn likes to say is, who does a lot of research in communication, public speaking, are the 3 hecks of source citations. So when you're thinking about source credibility, who the heck wrote it, right? Finding the credentials, the experience of the author, who the heck paid for it. So if it's a BuzzFeed listicle that's top 5 ways to keep your pet healthy, and it's sponsored by Purina, it's probably going to try to get you to buy Purina dog food, right? So you have to think about the role that bias plays. When the heck was it published? So recent is generally better, although there are some older pieces that can be really foundational and important. We still talk about things like Aristotle and Plato now. So use recent sources when you can, but there are some older sources that can be okay. It's really a starting point. How about this group here in the front?
So we said one of the things that we had in common was the little to no grammatical and punctuation errors. Making sure that your writing is organized and structured. Depending on the class, you might need APA or MLA, or just making sure that your writing fits which format you're writing for.
Yeah.
And then your citations are correct, like you just talked about. Depending on the format, you have different expectations for what they look like, and making sure that those are correct.
Yeah, these are really great points, right? And finding a format and sticking to it is really important. There have been a lot of times where I've gotten this mixture of MLA and APA and different citation formats. So finding and really mastering one, or really understanding the ins and outs if there's a format required for a class is a really good starting point. Earlier today on Canvas, I posted an announcement that was Some of the ways that you can do MLA versus APA versus Chicago, I linked a University of Pittsburgh database that has a lot of different examples of these different citation styles. You can even use something like a citation machine or online citation maker if you want. I have no problem with those, but the trick is, first of all, you got to get rid of the weird formatting and underlining and font changes. One easy way to do that is to copy it and then paste without formatting. The other thing to be really careful about is if you're using online citation makers, sometimes they're going to miss and just not get certain details. So you're citing a news article and it says, oh, there's no author. But then you actually look in the article itself and there is an author attached. Filling in the gaps of the things it didn't cover is an important step too. You can also do the feature where you're like manually entering in the information yourself for a source. That can also work really well. About this group here on the third row.
So we said when writing good causal statements, be well thought out and planned, like a rough draft or even a rough draft.
Yeah.
Like minimal errors, grammatical correct, writing must be consistent, make it engaging, use the correct formats, and peer revision. Yeah, have someone else look at it and then reread it. Sometimes you can miss stuff if you
Yeah, you know, it does need to be your own work, but that doesn't mean that you can't talk to peers and other folks to get help or reach out to things like the Writing Center to get help on drafts or outlines or things like that too, right? That's totally okay as long as what you write at the end of the day is yours. So getting that second pair of eyes can be really helpful if there's just certain parts that you just need a little bit more of a look at. Or like, this paragraph's kind of weird, what do I do? Yeah.
Something to add about what you just said is that it might make sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to other people.
Right.
So that's why it's good to always have that peer revision.
Yeah, right? Like communication is that encoding and uploading phase, and sometimes there's like something missing in our heads that we're trying to get onto the page, but just doesn't get translated out. So yeah, that's absolutely a challenge. It's clarity and specificity with reaching your audience. Got a group here right behind them.
I think everyone's covering quite a bit. We could add that just potentially a thesis or strong statement, clear content, smooth transition. The length, I mean, they could be anywhere on the short side to the long side. It's just that professor requires.
Yeah, I like the idea of smooth transitions, right? I should understand, you know, why this paragraph follows this paragraph. One easy way to do that, right, is to have that topic sentence that sets up the main point of the paragraph and then to conclude with some type of summary or preview of what's next, right? Now that we've looked at how Ross and Rachel use uncertainty reduction theory, let's now look at how they engage in ethical listening, or not. I mean, I've watched Friends, and a lot of their listening doesn't seem very good. So that type of structure and formatting can help a lot. And how about these folks here in the corner?
All of us? All right. Yeah, we're kind of last, so everybody's not covered a lot. But,
Sure.
It's like punctuation, good thesis,
Yeah.
organization. It's
Yeah.
really interesting to the reader. And like, it covers the essay topic.
Yeah. I really like your group's discussion about keeping things interesting. A lot of times when we think of college writing, we think it's boring, it's dry, it's overly formal, it's like very detached from who you are as a person. It doesn't have to be that way, right? You can still include good formal writing. You know, it's not like you're sending a text, but at the same time, you can make it engaging using a hook for your first sentence to get our attention, using interesting transition sentences, vivid imagery, avoiding passive voice, which involves using things like passive verbs in a way that sounds really boring and dry. So oftentimes, especially if we're trying to procrastinate and churn out a paper as fast as we can, we resort to using passive voice because it's easier to get those words out than it is to take the time to think of interesting words and imagery. So on a rough draft, you might have passive voice, and then over time, you can help to revise and make it a little bit better. I think it's James Baldwin, I could be wrong, who said you should make your writing as dry as bone, right? Making that clarity, eliminating unnecessary words. Oftentimes, shorter sentences are better than longer sentences. At the very least, avoiding run-ons and varying your sentence structure can help a lot. So these are a lot of really good points and observations about what makes for effective college writing. There's a few tips and suggestions that I want to add about that process and ways to improve your writing too. So what makes a good college essay can really vary class to class. You know, a lot of times, I know especially in the first few weeks, you try to figure out who the heck is your instructor, what do they want, how can I make an essay or assignment that fits really well. So again, at the absolute worst, you have a better sense of what I'm looking for. At best, this is a set of skills that you can continue to use and develop over time. So some of the things that I look for, right, is a clear argument that's advanced and supported through a thesis sentence, right? A thesis sentence should, in one sentence, describe the main point or idea that you're trying to advance. Through the characters of Pam and Jim in The Office, we see uncertainty reduction at play. Specifically, we see how these characters become more comfortable over time through reciprocal self-disclosure. So the thesis sentence is essentially setting up your major argument throughout the essay. Oftentimes, it's good to have a thesis sentence that emerges kind of about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down your first paragraph, right? Because you usually have some type of hook or way of getting our attention. You're introducing the topic and idea. You have your major argument or thesis. And then, in the rest of the paragraph, you provide a preview of the points that will come later. If you're like me, you're the type of person that agonizes over their first paragraph and tries to get it perfect before writing the rest of the essay. But oftentimes, if you just want to write and you're hung up on the first paragraph, actually developing and creating in a more inductive way the topic and the major arguments of the essay, and then coming back later to realize what your thesis sentence is, that can sometimes work too. It depends on how sure you are of the point you're trying to make early on. Another thing is your voice, right? So the thing you should avoid, and one problem that I've seen happen sometimes, is when a source kind of dominates the essay and you kind of like go off to the side and you're like, here, this source is going to speak for me. A couple ways that this happens is if you start a paragraph by quoting a source. I recommend avoiding that. Instead, I recommend what's called the sandwich method when it comes to citing your sources. Start with an introduction. So you say, one of the key elements in order to understand Jim and Pam's relationship is uncertainty reduction theory. Uncertainty reduction theory, and then you include a quote. What this shows us is that by disclosing and sharing more about ourselves over time, we communicate more. So set up the quote, use the quote, and then summarize or explain. You should never have elements of a quotation that you're never going to use later. Why quote something if it's not going to be a part of your argument? In other words, the quote does not speak for itself. You are speaking, and the quote is serving you and your purpose. Organized writing. So one thing I really recommend is outlining. Before you even create a rough draft, create an outline of the major arguments or points that you'll be exploring in the essay. So the outline might include what your thesis sentence is, what your major body points are, and what your conclusion is. So when I say body points, I typically mean something like 2 to 3 major points that support your thesis. So if your thesis is that over the course of The Office, the characters of Jim and Pam use reciprocal self-disclosure to reduce uncertainty, you might say, we'll examine this first by looking at the earlier seasons of The Office, and second by examining the later seasons. A lot of times when people go to write essays, they feel like, oh geez, how the heck do I fill 4 pages of content? How do I do that? And I think that by having about half a page covered through an introduction, another half through a conclusion, and then having, a good 2 to 3 body points that are maybe like page and a half or so each, you break it down and make it feel a lot more manageable. Body points are your friends because body points allow you to break down your argument into different parts and make a longer essay than it might otherwise be. Clean conventions. So we've talked about this already. Avoid your grammar, spelling, indentation errors, and so on, right? I'll kind of talk about the clean sheet method in just a second, but it involves printing out a copy of a draft to look at later. And then, as folks brought up today, consistency, right, in the style choices that you make. So I linked on Canvas again, that differentiation of APA, MLA, and Chicago to help you out. So the first step is brainstorming. How many of you have ever had to procrastinate on a paper? Several of you? Yeah. I've been there. I've like sat on my bed on my laptop with like 4 empty cans of Monster Energy drinks, scrambling to get a paper done before class. I went from night before to morning of as a writer trying to get stuff in, so I understand. It's bad. I can't do that stuff anymore. But I will tell you that even if you're procrastinating on the writing itself, which I know is a really, really hard habit to break, you will be so thankful for your future self, right, if you take some time early on, if anything, to brainstorm. It is so much easier to come into writing a paper at the last minute if you've thought through and know your topic and you know your argument, right, than it is to come in with nothing. So at the very least, brainstorming up front helps a lot, takes very little effort. Some of the ways to do that are to read the prompt carefully, understand what the prompt is asking you to do. Maybe as you're reading, you jot down a few ideas. Oh, hey, this new show on Netflix, Squid Game, just came out. And there's some really interpersonal communication going on here. So you can use that as a starting point. Look at the rubric, assignment guidelines, talk to me. And then the other thing I'd encourage is that for this essay, I'm asking you to use relevant concepts in interpersonal communication. So maybe there are things that jump out at you. Maybe you do like uncertainty reduction theory a lot, and you kind of star and circle that and know, I'm going to go back to these notes later. I'm going to go back to this chapter in Wrench later to understand and engage with this topic a little bit more. So that early on effort can help a lot. One thing I wanted to show you as well is that on Canvas, I've also posted the on Canvas, I have also posted the rubric for this assignment. The assignment description is also up there. Again, this isn't for a while. This isn't due for over a month, but I think it pays to start thinking about and looking into this assignment. So if you look on Canvas, you'll see a couple things related to this class. The first thing that you'll notice is if you go under assignments, you'll see that the interpersonal analysis essay is here. It's also available on the syllabus, like a brief description of this assignment. You're looking at like various elements that we've learned from interpersonal communication. You pick an episode, you pick a film or episode of a series. You look at the relationship between two characters. You draw from the course to understand how they engage with each other, right? And you also know some of the basics in terms of length, so on. Again, this is right available on Canvas. I also, I know that you have a lot of time. I posted this in my other class, but I'll post it here right after class. There's also a rubric available for you. So the rubric goes over sort of the major elements of the substance and style of the essay. So things like formatting, references, your body points, your structure, and so on. Think about this rubric as a checklist of the things that you will need to include for your essay. You could even circle it, you know, print out your own copy and run through it as you're working. So we'll talk again more about some of the specifics there, and I'm also going to have an opportunity for us to share and workshop our ideas together. Yeah?
So I was thinking about TV shows that like have interpersonal.
Yeah.
I was wondering about Phineas and Ferb.
Yeah.
So would their relationship be considered an interpersonal, even though Ferb like literally doesn't say anything?
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing to look at, right? I think if there's a lot to draw from in terms of nonverbal communication, you know, especially in something like an animated show, there's a lot of like expression and ways that the characters engage with each other. There's a lot of interesting duos like that, right? Where there's not necessarily like verbal communication on both sides. But because nonverbal expressions, gesturing, and so on is interpersonal communication, yeah. I hadn't really thought about animated shows all that much, but animated shows or movies, yeah, absolutely. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, right, the relationship between the characters joy and sadness, that'd be a really cool analysis too. So it's interesting because since it's mediated and uses animation, the expressions, the behaviors, the characteristics can be exaggerated in really new and unique ways. So it's definitely worth looking at. That's a great question. You ever have an idea like this and you want to run it by me, you can email me, get in touch with me, office hours, anything else, I would love to chat about it. So when it comes to outlining, the outline is a really nice thing. Again, the next step to avoid procrastination and to help your future self, right, is to have things like your thesis sentence. Thinking about your two major body points. And when you think about your body points, you really want to think about this in terms of substructure. That is, the body points need to go under or support the main argument. They shouldn't be separate thesis statements, right? If the thesis sentence is, Jim and Pam use uncertainty reduction theory and reciprocal self-disclosure, then you can support that broader argument through the first few episodes and then the later episodes, right? You can also think about further breaking down your body points by saying, you know, here's the main evidence, here's the main support, here are the quotations or passages that I'm going to use here in order to highlight this relationship. Again, you can think about these as being in the service of your major body points. And then when it comes to the conclusion of your essay, another sandwich is, maybe I mentioned sandwiches a lot because it's just after lunch, I don't know. But tell me what you're going to tell me, right? Provide a preview early on in the essay. Tell me, provide those arguments in the essay itself. Tell me what you told me, where you provide a summary, a recap of the things that you said in your conclusion. And it's okay for your thesis and your body points to change over time. Maybe you discover that the argument you had initially is totally different now that you've really looked at and analyzed your writing. That's okay. Just make sure that you're updating things to reflect that change. When it comes to writing, I don't know about you, but I reach a point, like after maybe an hour or so of writing, where I get burnt out, and I don't feel like the writing quality is as good. So pace yourself, right? Give yourself time. Maybe you write a page or two or a paragraph, you know, every other day or so. Use the outline to help you. You can literally copy-paste sections of the outline to start your paragraphs. And I find that, you know, once we get that thing started, it's a lot easier to fill out and write the rest of the paragraph. Make sure that you're both introducing and explaining your relevant sources and quotations. Again, the quotations don't speak for themselves. You are introducing and explaining why those quotations support your argument. Another thing, and one of the most common issues that I've noticed in college essays, right, is folks will have paragraphs that go on and on and on. And an ideal rule of thumb is that if a paragraph is going longer than a half a page double-spaced, then you've probably moved on to a different idea, and you can probably break it into a second paragraph, right? So my partner runs a nonprofit. She does a lot of things like writing grants in order to get funding, and has to do a whole lot of formal writing. And one trick that I learned from her that I think is a really useful strategy is the printout method. So ideally, between 24 to 48 hours before your essay is due, if you can, print out a paper copy. You could also, you know, have a copy open on a document like Word, Google Docs, and so on, right? Give yourself a day where you do not touch or look or think about it. Come back to the printout or the fully written draft, and then just read through it. You could have a pen with you as you work through it. But you'll notice a lot of issues or changes or revisions that you can make that you did not notice as you were writing. If you mentally are going over the same paragraphs over and over in your head, you're going to miss stuff. Go in with a fresh pair of eyes, and it's a really nice way to identify issues that came up before. Another good reason to look at rough drafts and outlines ahead of time is since I'll take a look at those too. So I'm happy to look at rough drafts and outlines. The sooner you send them to me, the better, because the sooner I can give you feedback and help you to incorporate those changes. There's another question that came up in the class about the use of things like Google Docs, right? Your anonymous feedback was super helpful, and I was trying to build a lot of these suggestions based on the things that stood out to you in that form. So you can use Google Docs. In fact, I know that Google Docs can be great and really accessible, and you can move between devices to use it. I do ask that you download like a doc or docx out of the Google Doc. That way I have a stable version. The main reason I do that and why I don't want like a Google Doc link for your assignment is because Google Doc links can change, right? They can get deleted, they can get altered, their permissions can change. And to make sure that I have your paper and can grade it, I just want a stable copy, right? A copy that doesn't change. So you can for sure use Google Docs, just make sure to download a document out of that you upload for this assignment. If you're having any trouble doing that, just let me know, and I'm happy to help guide you through the process. But it should just be under the File tab on Google Docs. So, I want to use kind of a fun example. We'll walk through together a few different scenarios of both good and bad writing. I've also posted this on Canvas, so if you want to work through this on your own or practice this, you can do that. So let me get that up for you. In light of these challenges, we must act without delay. Johnson, 1999, page 10. Which citation style is this? APA, MLA, or Chicago? How many folks think APA? MLA? Chicago? Okay. So this is why we're working on this together, right? So this can be best defined as APA, right? Chicago style is the type of style that generally uses endnotes or footnotes, right? So maybe you have the quotation and then there's a little one at the top, and then after that, there's a list of sources. So that would be the best way to use Chicago. MLA and APA are pretty similar, but MLA would not include the year there. So last name, year, and then page number, if you're quoting from a page number, would best fit under the APA style. And I'm actually going to show you real quick some of the key differences between the three. Again, this is available for you under that announcement on Canvas. Right, so APA has last name, year. You can also have page number if there's a direct page being cited. That's the in-text, the works cited, or reference list that you include at the end. Last name, first initials, year, title, and then the publisher. That's for a book, but there's some variations that you would do for an article, like an internet article, or a website publication. MLA, right, has some similarities, but you'll notice that it doesn't have the comma, and it doesn't have the year. It might use something like the pages right there. Last name, first name, title, publisher, year. So again, that Pittsburgh link actually has a ton of other examples about each of these three major citation styles and how you can use that for different things, including an internet article and so on. Right? So it has this list here, and then you can switch over to MLA, Chicago, and so on. And, you know, let me know if you're having trouble with citations. I'd much rather have you come up to me and let me know that you're struggling with that and need some additional support. Because, right, I take plagiarism really seriously, right? When it comes to plagiarism, intentionality doesn't matter, right? Impact does. So I have a lot of situations where folks say, well, I didn't mean to plagiarize. You still do, right? As a result, please reach out to me if you need something double-checked and need to make sure that something is not plagiarized. Plagiarism is representing the ideas, words, or work of somebody else as your own, according to the EUU student pledge, right? At best, it's a 0 on the assignment. At worst, it's a 0 in the class. If you are procrastinating and falling behind, it is not strategic for you to put including sources as like one of your last priorities, right? Because you don't do that, you get a 0. So put that first, even if the essay is incomplete. In fact, I would much rather have you turn in a late essay than turn in a plagiarized essay. So give yourself an extra day. Remember, my late policy is -5%. For each day something's late. That's a lot better than risking through plagiarism. So plagiarism can be direct quotations without attribution. So you're quoting another source, but there's no source to be found. Paraphrasing. So one of the biggest misconceptions about plagiarism is that if it's not quoted, it doesn't count. If you are citing the ideas or thoughts or expertise of somebody that's not you in a formal essay and you're not citing them, then it still counts as plagiarism. Don't double dip and use stuff from this class for another class, right? This class uses turnedin.com, which is verified there. If there is work that's crossing over with another class, just let me know and we can problem solve there. Make sure to include a full works cited list. Don't just include a URL. That oftentimes happens at the last minute, right? Don't steal the work of another student without permission. And don't have somebody else write the essay for you, like hire somebody to do that. That's also pretty identifiable through something like Turnitin. Passive voice, right, is using things like passive verbs. So oftentimes it can sound really silly. In the forthcoming essay, it will be argued that blah, 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 right? I will argue is a lot easier. So it's okay to use I, me, and so on in the class because I think you're making an argumentative essay, you're expressing an opinion, and I find that that can help to compress the content of the essay too. Don't just include large block quotations, right? Larger quotations should be used only if all the quotation matters. So if you have a large block quote, but there's only like one sentence or part in that large quote that you intend to use, just get that part out and just use that for your citation. Again, quotes don't speak for themselves. Introduce the quote. Next, we can look to Johnson's expertise in uncertainty reduction theory. Quote, as we can see here, uncertainty reduction theory involves reciprocal self-disclosure. So I'm going to walk through a couple more examples here. If I can get this working. Communication audiences can be divided into a pyramid with intrapersonal at the top and mediated communication at the bottom. That does require a citation because it's drawing from a key idea or concept. You did not come up with a pyramid, or the pyramid is not common knowledge, so you want to cite the book in that situation. According to Johnson, we must act without delay, right? That should also include a citation because you are quoting, and you do need to have that attribution. In my opinion, more communication should be interpersonal rather than mediated. That doesn't need a citation because you're expressing your own opinion or point of view on the topic. You can try on your own after class, revising this sentence to eliminate passive voice. It's just a fun little activity to do. You might say something like, I argue that media has significantly increased, though we can even make it more compact than that if we wanted to. Only use large block quotations if the entirety of that quotation is helpful, and a complete citation, as we talked about earlier, includes all of those details like the author, date, and so on, and is going to vary a little bit depending on format. So to bring together what we talked about today, and again, thanks for your tech patience earlier. Good writing involves preparation, thinking ahead, planning, citing sources, revise, revise, revise. The sooner you do that, the better. And you avoid using plagiarism. Again, I want to help empower you to have the resources to avoid that happening. For Wednesday's class, we're going to dive right back into interpersonal communication. So please read Rent 73 to 99. A PDF with just those pages is available on Canvas. as you're reading, think to yourself, what is intrapersonal communication, and how is it something that develops over time? Otherwise, I hope that you all have an awesome afternoon and are enjoying your second week here at EMU. Thank you all for your work. Make sure to turn in that individual prompt. I'll use that for attendance today. And I will see you again on Wednesday.